kiddos, if this is you looking for physical science online, then no worries, you are in the right place. Module 1.1.1, the history and nature of science. This will be quick and painless, I promise. So let's get it out of the way. I begin this presentation just discussing things that science is not, things science cannot do. For example, science cannot address some deeper questions about what it means to be a human on planet Earth. For that, we need things like art, religion, and spirituality. Possibly, if you're a religious or spiritual person, which explores the supernatural. Super meaning above, natural meaning the natural physical world. So, religion and spirituality is concerned with possible things, entities, deities that exist beyond or above the physical world. Science can also not address questions like, how is knowledge possible? Why do things exist? What is the best way for human society to organize itself, etc.? That is the job for philosophy, which explores multitudes of interesting, curious questions. So science cannot do any of those things. Science is concerned with gaining definite knowledge and understanding about the world and how it works. And science seeks to discover objective ideas or concepts about the natural physical world, about things we can observe, things we can test, things upon which we can do experiments. And that word objective there is incredibly important. Objective is the opposite of subjective. Subjective is some of these things like art. Art is all about your subjective experience. How do you experience this painting? What sort of emotions arise? How does this novel affect you internally, emotionally? How does this piece of art inform or discuss subjective values? What do you value? What's important to you? Those are subjective things. But science wants to get at objective things, at facts, things that are not disputable, things that everyone can agree upon, that everyone can observe, things that are not influenced by opinion or feeling or emotion or bias. And it's also really important to me that you guys understand that science is a historical process. We have not always had science. Science was developed over many, many centuries, particularly in the scientific revolution, which you all will read about in your reading assignment for this module. So science is a process, and it's always being always being self-corrected. It's always being updated or revised. Notice that at the very end of this slide, I say that even though science does not address directly those deeper, so to speak, questions of the lived human experience, what it means to be a human on planet Earth, how should a human live and spend their life on planet Earth, even though science does not deal with that question directly, it can still inform and comment upon those deeper questions. So, for example, the scientific fact based on years and years and years of data, based on careful experimentations, observations, based on objective facts that scientists have gathered, we've come to the conclusion as a scientific community that that the climate on our globe is changing. It's getting warmer due to the greenhouse effect, greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, water vapor, methane gases, things like this, trapping heat in our atmosphere. The Earth is getting warmer. That's a scientific fact. That's based on science, things that no one can reasonably dispute or argue against. So that fact can inform the choices I make, the way that I live my life, what I value. So it may inform the type of car that I purchase and drive. It may inform my values of spending more time walking or riding my bike. It may inform the food that I choose to eat. As I struggle with my own environmental ecological footprint, what kind of impact do my choices, my behaviors have on the environment, etc. There are many examples of how science can inform the way that we live. The next few slides, I have some really important definitions: scientific law, scientific theory, and scientific models. Beginning with the scientific law, a law is a statement of fact based on observation, which shows how concepts or variables are related to each other. A law does not attempt to explain why. A law simply shows how. It shows how things are related. Often that's expressed as a mathematical equation. There's some laws that we're actually going to be exploring in this course. These are two very important ones. Over here on the left, we see Newton's law of universal gravitation. This law explains how force, the force of gravity, is related to mass and distance, m1 and m2 being the masses of the two objects which are attracting each other gravitationally, and the d being the distance between them. So this is a law. It's a mathematical expression that states a fact, how mass and distance are related to the force of gravitational attraction. Over on the right-hand side, this is another law called Coulomb's law, and this time this law expresses how the force of attraction or repulsion between charged particles, so positive and negatively charged particles, how that force is related to the size of those charges, how strong the positive or negative charge is on the substance, and the distance between those particles. So these are laws. Laws are used to help make predictions. How strong will the force of gravity be if these objects are this distance apart? How strong will the force of attraction or repulsion be if these charged particles are this distance apart, etc. Laws are statements of fact based on observation. And notice here on this slide I said that laws are uncovered. Humans discover laws that seem to already exist out there in nature. They're a way for us to describe how nature works. This is a really interesting example of a law. A man named Kepler in the 1600s kind of worked with and built upon Newton's law of gravitation. And he developed laws about how the planets orbit around the sun. And he discovered a really interesting law that that the period of a planet's orbit around the sun, how many days it takes for the planet to orbit around the sun, is related to the distance that planet seems to be from the sun. So you can see on that table up there, the very far right, there's the ratio of the distance cubed divided by the period squared. So there's a definite mathematical relationship between the distance from the sun and how many days it takes for the planets to orbit around the sun. And this is related to Newton's law of gravity and all these things. And Kepler was amazed when he discovered this. There's a quote down here. He thought he was dreaming that the data would fit this nicely. And you can see there on the right-hand side that that ratio is pretty much constant, which is very interesting. So Kepler he uncovered this law just by taking very careful, objective pieces of data and then trying to find a relationship. And he discovered one of the most important laws of astronomy. A scientific theory is different. A scientific theory is an overarching, broad attempt to explain something observed in nature. If laws answer the question how, theories answer the question why. Theories typically incorporate laws. They use laws. They have laws in them. But as I said, a theory is the best explanation for why a natural phenomenon is taking place. It's the best explanation and the best answer that we have. Just like laws, theories are constructed from the results of many observations and experimentations. Notice here I'm using the word construct. Theories are human constructs, human constructions. We build them, we create them. And as such, they are always open to interpretation and open to being corrected, open to being refined and corrected over time as new experimental methods, new data, and new ideas are developed. A huge misconception is that a theory becomes a law or something like that. That's completely incorrect. Theories and laws are totally different. Theories try to explain why. Laws try to show how things are related. So here are some examples of theories. Isaac Newton over here on the top left, he had a theory about how space worked, what it was, and that affected his theory of gravity, as we discussed earlier, why things seem to be attracted to each other, why large masses are attracted to each other, his law and his theory of gravitation. And Newton's theory worked for hundreds of years, and then this troublemaker Einstein in the early 1900s comes along and he develops his theory of general relativity. And Newton's theory was shown to be incorrect. It was shown to only be a slight approximation. Instead, Einstein showed that space is not fixed, it is flexible. Space time is one sort of fabric that can be warped and bent by large concentrations of energy or mass. And so in that picture up there with Einstein, you can see that space-time is warped by the mass of the Earth, and that is his theory of gravity, why things are attracted to each other if their masses are large, because a large mass literally warps and bends space-time. Down here on the bottom right, you can see kind of a complicated little explanation of these two descriptions, but you can see on the left Newton's idea that space had a flat geometry. On the right, Einstein's idea that no space-time can actually be curved, things like that. So theories can be revised and updated over time as scientists make new discoveries, new revolutionary ideas, things like that. But big idea is that theories attempt to explain why. A model is related to both of these things, and a model is kind of a picture or a metaphor to describe what something is like, to show how it works. And just like theories, models can be changed or updated. A model can take many different forms. It could be a series of words, so it can be a narrative or a word-based model. It could be graphical. It could be based on data. It could be based on a graph. It could be mathematical, almost like a law. I would say a law is kind of like a mathematical model with an equation. It models something with an equation. If we go back here to our laws that we discussed, these are models, pictures of how something works in a mathematical form. These are some of my favorite models. The development of the atomic model throughout time. In other words, scientists' ideas of what the atom is like have developed and changed over time. Remember, I told you that science is a historical process. It's always building, always being revised and changed as science tries to get as close as possible to discovering objective reality. What is the nature of the universe? How does it work? What is it like? Here's another model for my scholar friends out there who are more inclined to the biological sciences. If you remember discussing in biology the lock and key model of how an enzyme works. Remember, an enzyme is a protein that speeds up a chemical reaction. The substrate is the chemical that's going to be acted upon by the enzyme. So up here on the top, we have one model of how an enzyme may work called the lock and key model, where the enzyme has a specific shape like a lock, the substrate has a specific shape like a key, and they fit together, and the enzyme works on the substrate to break it down or build it up together, and then the enzyme is there ready to repeat the action. Another model of how enzymes may work is called the induced fit model, where when the substrate kind of binds to the enzyme literally stretches and bends, puts pressure and tension on the substrate and causes the substrate to break. So the fit is kind of forced or induced when they come together. The enzyme slightly changes shape. So these are models of how enzymes work in cells.